My brother spent 3 weeks telling everyone that our father had left the company to him. Not just the family, everyone. The neighbors who came to pay their respects, the men from the church who brought food, the cousins who drove in from out of state. He told all of them, in the specific tone of a man delivering news that he had been waiting a long time to deliver, that our father had made his wishes clear and that the company was going to stay in the family under his leadership. People congratulated him. They shook his hand. They said things about legacy and continuation and how proud our father would have been. My brother accepted all of it. He had also, in those 3 weeks, begun making plans. He had called 3 of the company's major suppliers to introduce himself as the incoming owner. He had spoken to the company's office manager about some changes he intended to make. He had mentioned to his wife that they should start looking at houses in a different part of town, the better part, the part that reflected where they were going now. He had done all of this with complete confidence. That confidence was the most important thing to understand about what happened next. Not the lie, the confidence underneath the lie. My father's funeral was held at Calvary Baptist Church on a Thursday morning in October. The building was full. My father had been known in that community for 40 years, and the fullness of the room was the honest evidence of that. People filled the pews and stood along the walls and spilled into the lobby, and nobody thought to leave, because nobody wanted to be somewhere other than that room on that particular morning. The service was beautiful in the way of services that are organized by people who actually knew the person they are honoring. The pastor spoke about specifics. Former employees spoke. A woman from the neighborhood association whom my father had helped during a difficult period in the 1990s stood up and said something that nobody in the room had heard before, and that made the silence afterward feel significant. And then my father's attorney, a man named Gerald Ose, who had handled our father's affairs for 19 years, stood up. He had been asked to speak as part of the service. My brother had assumed this meant the will reading was being incorporated into the funeral, which was unusual but which he had apparently decided reflected how important the moment was. Gerald Ose cleared his throat. He said he had known our father since 1986, and that what he wanted the family and the community to understand was the kind of man Walter Ajay had been in private, away from the business, in the moments when the decisions were hardest and the audience was smallest. And then he said, calmly and clearly into the microphone, that our father had made a final decision about the company approximately 30 days before his passing. The company had been sold. The full proceeds had been designated for specific purposes that Gerald would discuss with the family after the service. The room absorbed this. My brother was in the second pew. I was watching him when it landed. His body did something that I had never seen a body do before. Not a collapse, not a faint, but something in between. A giving way of the structural support in his legs that brought him to his knees before he could decide what to do about it. Someone near him reached out. He was on the floor of Calvary Baptist Church for approximately 15 seconds. Then he collected himself and got back into the pew. But those 15 seconds, every person in that building saw them. Before I tell you what the company was sold for and where the money went, and what our father had known about my brother that he had never once said out loud directly to anyone, I need to take you back to where this story actually starts. Like this video, subscribe and ring the notification bell. Comment below, when Gerald Ose stood up, what do you think was going through my brother's mind? Let us go all the way back. Our father, Walter Ajay, built Ajay Electrical Contractors from a van and a license. That is not a metaphor. Literally a van, a white 1981 Ford Econoline that he had purchased for $2,400 cash, which was approximately everything he had in 1983. And a journeyman electrician's license he had earned after 4 years of apprenticeship work under a contractor named James Morrow, who had taken him on at 21, and who had run his operation with the specific rigor of someone who understood that electrical work done incorrectly did not produce inconvenience. It produced fire. Our father absorbed this understanding completely. He learned from James Morrow for 4 years. He was the first person on every job site and the last person to leave. He asked questions about things he already understood because he wanted to confirm his understanding was correct, not because he was performing interest. James Morrow recognized this quality and responded to it by teaching him things that were not technically part of the apprenticeship. By the time our father left James Morrow's operation, he was 25 years old, and he understood electrical contracting at a level that most licensed contractors with 10 years of experience had not reached. He started with residential work. The van and the license, and a reputation that traveled through the neighborhood on Accra Road in Kumasi, where he had grown up, where his mother Abina still lived, and where people knew him and trusted the Ajay name, because Abina had built that trust over 40 years of being the kind of neighbor who showed up when showing up was needed. The first commercial contract came in 1987, 3 years in. A small factory on the industrial estate that needed a rewiring job that 2 other contractors had assessed and declined, because the scope was more complex than it looked, and the liability exposure if something went wrong was significant. Our father assessed it and took it. Not recklessly. He knew what he was taking on. He had done the calculations and he understood the complexity, and he was confident that his understanding of the problem was accurate and that his plan for addressing it was sound. The job took 6 weeks and came in under budget. The factory manager referred him to 2 other facilities. By 1990, Ajay Electrical Contractors had 4 employees and 3 vehicles. By 1995, 22 employees and contracts with major institutional clients, including 2 hospital campuses. By 2005, 60 employees and a reputation in the commercial and industrial electrical contracting space in the region that was built entirely on 2 things: doing the work correctly and keeping the promises. Our father said once, sitting at the dinner table when we were children, that the business was not complicated. He said, "Do what you say you are going to do and do it the way it is supposed to be done. The customers will find you." He said it simply. It was the most important thing he ever said to us. My brother Marcus heard it. I heard it. We absorbed it differently. I am the younger of 2. Marcus is 6 years older, which meant he grew up in a different version of the business than I did. I grew up watching it successful. He grew up watching it being built, which sounds like it should have produced more respect for the building, but which instead produced in Marcus a specific impatience with the building process itself. He wanted the arrived version of the thing rather than the in-transit version. Our father recognized this early. He did not address it directly. He was not that kind of parent. He believed in showing rather than telling, which worked very well for some lessons, and left certain other lessons undelivered in ways that had consequences later. Marcus joined the company after university. He studied business administration, and he was capable at it, genuinely capable, with a good mind for numbers and an ease with clients that was real and useful. Our father gave him increasing responsibility over his early years, and Marcus performed adequately in those roles. Adequately was the word. Not exceptionally, not with the specific hunger that the business had been built on. Adequately. He did what was asked correctly and without particular investment in the work beyond what was required to be considered to be doing it. Our father noticed. I noticed. What Marcus noticed was that the business was large enough now that adequate performance could be maintained, without anyone being able to specifically identify what was missing. The problem started becoming visible around 2015, when our father began stepping back from day-to-day operations, and Marcus moved into a more senior role. A key project manager left. The reason was documented in his resignation letter, which he gave to the HR coordinator, and which our father read, and which said, clearly and without apparent anger, that the direction of the company's internal culture under Marcus's management had shifted in ways that made the work environment uncomfortable for people who had been there for a long time. Our father had that conversation with Marcus. I was not in the room, but I know what our father was like in those conversations. He would have been calm and specific, and he would have listened fully before he responded, and he would have said something measured that was much harder to dismiss than an argument would have been. Marcus, from everything I observed in the years after that conversation, concluded that the issue had been resolved. The issue had not been resolved. It had been managed temporarily by Marcus adjusting his visible behavior, and then, over the next 18 months, gradually returning to pattern. 2 more senior people left. Our father was watching all of it. He was also, during this period, having conversations with Gerald Osai that Marcus did not know about, and that I did not know about until much later. I worked in the business from the outside. That was how I thought of it, even though I was technically employed by the company from 2008 onward. I was in the project engineering side, the technical work, the part of the operation that Marcus did not particularly want to engage with because it required the specific patience for complexity that Marcus found tedious. I was good at the technical work the way our father was good at everything, by being genuinely interested in it, and by understanding that the details mattered before the outcomes could be trusted. Our father and I had a working relationship that was easy in the way of 2 people who were organized similarly. We did not always agree. When we disagreed, I said so, and he heard the disagreement, and we worked through it and arrived somewhere. He respected direct disagreement in a way that he did not always respect performed agreement. Marcus performed agreement. For years, Marcus performed agreement with our father, and our father watched this and understood it for exactly what it was. I understood it too. What I did not understand, until Gerald Osai stood up at the funeral, was what our father had decided to do about it. Subscribe to this channel right now and ring the bell. In the last 3 years of our father's life, something shifted. I noticed it as a quality of attention. He was always attentive, but the attention changed in those years. It became more deliberate. He asked different kinds of questions. He showed up to project sites that he had delegated years earlier. He sat in the van sometimes in the company parking lot before coming inside, which he had never done before, and the office manager mentioned it to me once with the specific concern of someone who had worked for a person long enough to find small changes in their habits significant. He was also spending more time with Gerald Osai. I knew this because Gerald's assistant called him directly rather than going through the company's administrative line, and because I had seen Gerald's car at the house on 2 occasions that were not holidays or occasions where a family attorney would normally visit. I did not ask. It was not my habit to ask about things I was not invited to ask about. Our father had taught me, by example, that information offered at the right moment was more reliable than information extracted through questions, and I had patience enough to wait. He told me in August, 2 months before he passed. Not all of it, the shape of it. He sat me down in his office, the one at the back of the company facility, the small one that had been his office since 1991, and that he had never upgraded despite 30 years of opportunity, because the original office worked and he did not change things that worked, and he told me that he had been thinking carefully about the business and its future. He said he had come to a conclusion that had taken him a long time. He said the conclusion was the right one even though it was not the easy one. He said, the company was built on a promise. Every contract is a promise. Every employee depends on those promises being kept. The job of whoever runs this company is to keep those promises the way I kept them. He stopped there. He did not say Marcus's name. He did not need to. I said nothing. I waited. He said, "I have made arrangements that I believe are correct. Gerald has the details. I want you to trust the arrangements." I said, "Okay, Papa." He looked at me for a moment with the specific expression of a man who had something more to say and who was deciding whether this was the moment to say it. He decided it was not. He changed the subject. We talked about a project in the eastern region that had had some procurement complications and how we were going to resolve them. That was the last time we talked in his office. He passed 6 weeks later. He had been ill for longer than most of the family knew. He had managed the information carefully, which was entirely consistent with how he managed everything. He had not wanted the knowledge of his illness to change the way people behaved around him, which it would have, because people behaved differently when they were calculating the end of something rather than experiencing the middle of it. He wanted the middle experienced correctly. He managed it. Marcus found out about the illness the way he found out about most things in the final years of our father's life, later than he should have, because our father had concluded that telling Marcus things in advance produced performances of response rather than genuine ones, and he did not have the energy for performances. When Marcus found out, there were approximately 4 weeks left. He came to the house. He sat with our father. He said the things that people said. Our father listened. He told Marcus he loved him. He did not tell Marcus what he had decided about the company. Marcus, reading the situation through his own specific lens, concluded that certain things went without saying. The company was the family's primary asset. It was named AJ Electrical Contractors. Marcus was the older son who had been in the business for 20 years. These facts in Marcus's arrangement of them added up to a conclusion that he mistook for certainty. The first person he told was his wife, Denise. Denise told her mother. Her mother told someone else. By the week of our father's passing, the information was circulating in the family and the community as established fact. Marcus had encouraged this, not through lies exactly, through an absence of correction. When people said things to him like, "I am sure your father is leaving the business in good hands," he had received those statements with the nod of someone accepting what was true rather than correcting what was assumed. The effect was the same as a lie. He had known it was the same as a lie. He had made a calculation that the outcome would justify it, and that the will reading would confirm what everyone already believed, and the brief awkwardness of having let them believe it would be absorbed into the larger story. That calculation was wrong. Our father had been making his own calculations for 3 years. Gerald Ose had been practicing estate law for 27 years when he first started working with our father. He was methodical and thorough, and he had the quality of someone who asked what you were actually trying to achieve before he told you how the law could help you achieve it. He understood that estates were not primarily legal documents. They were the final statements of a person about what they valued and what they wanted the world to look like after they were gone, and the legal documents were how those statements were made permanent. When our father had first raised the question of the company with him, Gerald had listened for a long time before he said anything. Our father had described the situation, not just the surface situation, the underlying one, the quality of work, the departures, the specific pattern he had observed over years in how Marcus related to responsibility versus how he related to authority. He had been precise about it. He had given examples. He had been clear that he was not speaking from frustration or from a particular incident, but from sustained observation over a long period. Gerald had listened to all of it. Then he had said, "Walter, what outcome do you want?" Our father had said, "I want the company to continue to be what it has been. I want the 60 people who work there to be able to trust that the promises the company makes will be kept. I want the work to be done the way it was always done. Gerald had said, and if Marcus leading the company does not produce that outcome. Our father had said, then Marcus should not lead the company. Gerald had said, that is a significant decision. Our father had said, I know, I have been making it carefully for 3 years. The process had taken another year. An independent valuation of the company. 3 separate approaches to value that Gerald had commissioned from different firms to ensure the number was accurate. Conversations with the leadership team about the company's future, without disclosing why those conversations were happening. A review of the succession options that Gerald had been thorough about because our father had been thorough about everything and expected the same. The conclusion had been the sale. Not because the company had no future, because the right future for the company required a specific kind of leadership that the available family succession path did not reliably provide, and because our father had watched enough businesses built by good people collapse under inadequate successors to understand that a controlled exit on his terms was a better act of stewardship than a transfer that was likely to produce the wrong result. The buyer was a mid-sized regional electrical contracting group that had been looking to expand its footprint, and that had the operational structure to absorb and properly run what our father had built. The sale price reflected full value. Gerald had made sure of that. The proceeds had been structured with the same deliberateness that everything else had been structured with. A portion went to my mother, Comfort, in a trust that guaranteed her financial security for the rest of her life without restriction. A portion was divided between Marcus and me equally, not because our father thought equal was right in any moral sense, because equal was clean and defensible, and because the amount was meaningful without being a statement about who had earned what. Marcus received what I received. The business was separate from the inheritance. The business had been separate from the inheritance because our father had understood clearly that they were separate things. One was what he had built, the other was what he chose to give. What he gave was given carefully. What he had built was disposed of carefully. These were 2 different acts of care with 2 different objects. The final allocation in the will addressed the employees directly. Gerald had told our father, when they were working through the structure, that it was unusual to include employee provisions in a personal will rather than handling them through the sale agreement. Our father had said, I know it is unusual, do it. Gerald had done it. Every employee with more than 5 years of service received a direct payment from the estate. The amounts were scaled to tenure. The payments were designed to bridge the transition period while the new ownership took effect, and to acknowledge specifically that these were people who had kept the promises the company made with their daily work. Gerald had the paperwork for all of it when he stood up at Calvary Baptist Church. He had not delivered any of it yet. He had stood up to speak about the kind of man Walter Ajay had been. He had delivered one piece of information that changed what everyone in the room thought they knew. The rest he delivered to the family in his office that afternoon. The 15 seconds on the floor of Calvary Baptist Church produced a specific quality of silence in that room. Not the silence of people who did not understand what had happened. The silence of people who understood exactly what had happened and who were deciding in real time how to relate to it. Some of them had heard Marcus over the previous 3 weeks. Some of them had shaken his hand. Some of them had said things about legacy. They were all now recalibrating simultaneously in a room that held all of them together, and that did not allow for the private recalibration that might have been more comfortable. Marcus got back into the pew. His wife Denise was beside him. She had both hands in her lap and was looking at the space directly in front of her with the expression of someone who was very far away from the room they were physically in. Gerald completed his remarks about our father. They were good remarks, specific and honest in the way that our father had valued. He spoke about a man who had built something from a van and a license, and who had never once, in 19 years of working together, asked Gerald to do anything that was not correct. Then the service continued. The choir sang. The pastor said the closing prayer. People filed out into the October morning and stood in the parking lot in small clusters with coffee cups from the fellowship hall and the specific congregated grief of people who had known the same person well enough to have things to say about it. Marcus did not come to the parking lot. He went directly to his car. I saw him from across the lot, moving through the crowd with his head down, his hand on Denise's arm, getting into the car quickly. The door closed and the car did not move for a while. I watched it from where I was standing. My mother was beside me. She had her arm through mine, and she was receiving condolences from people who came to her with the care that people brought to the primary grief in a room, the wife of 42 years in the front pew. She was present for all of it with the dignity that she had always had, which was the same quality as our father's, the quality of a person who processed things internally before anything showed on the surface. She had known. Gerald had told her in July when the sale was close to finalizing. Our father had asked him to. He had not wanted comfort to find out in a room full of people. She had taken a week to be with the information. Then she had told me. She had said, "Your father sold the company." I had looked at her. She had said, "He did it correctly. Gerald has all of it. He wanted to tell you, but he was not strong enough by then for that conversation. He wants you to know that the decision was right and that he made it the same way he made everything." I had sat with my mother at her kitchen table for a long time after that. We had not talked about Marcus. We had talked about our father, about the van in 1983, about the factory rewiring job in 1987, about 60 people who came to work every day and kept promises on behalf of a company named after our family, about what it meant to build something and to understand at the end of it what it required to continue. Gerald's office that afternoon was organized and calm in the way Gerald organized everything. There were chairs for everyone. There was water. There were folders on the table with the documentation for each element of the estate. My mother sat at one end. I was beside her. Marcus and Denise were across from us. Gerald walked through the entire structure. The sale price, the allocation to our mother, the equal division between Marcus and me, the employee provisions, the charitable bequests which were modest and specific to 4 organizations our father had been quietly supporting for years. He read it clearly and completely. Marcus listened. He was not the person who had been in the church that morning. Something about those 15 seconds on the floor of Calvary Baptist had settled into him in a way that had changed the quality of his presence. He was quieter. His face was doing something more difficult and more honest than it usually did. When Gerald finished, there was a period of silence that nobody rushed. Then Marcus said something I had not expected. He said, "Was there a reason? Did he explain why?" Gerald said, "There is a letter. Your father wrote letters to your mother, to you, and to your brother separately. He asked me to deliver them after the reading." Gerald placed 3 envelopes on the table. They were sealed with the specific care of a man who had sealed things with care his entire life. Marcus looked at the envelope with his name on it for a long time before he picked it up. He held it without opening it. He said, "Can I have some time?" Gerald said, "Of course." We left the room. I read my letter in the car before I drove home. I am not going to share everything it said, but there was one paragraph that I have read many times since. Our father had written, "I did not explain things in the way that explanations usually happened, with words in advance of actions. I know this frustrated you sometimes. What I want you to understand is that I did not keep things to myself because I did not trust you. I kept things to myself because I understood that some conclusions had to be reached through the work rather than through the telling. You have always done the work. That is the most important thing I can say about you. Everything else follows from that. I sat in the car in Gerald's parking lot for a while. Then I drove home. Subscribe to this channel right now. Ring that bell. Marcus read his letter the same evening. Denise called me 2 days later. Not to complain, to tell me something she said I should know. She said Marcus had read the letter and had been very quiet for the rest of that evening, and had gone to bed early, and had not talked about it the next morning, which was unusual for Marcus, because Marcus was a person who processed things verbally, and who filled silence with words when silence made him uncomfortable. She said he had gone to church on Sunday, which he also did not do with regularity. She said he had called his own son, Marcus Jr., who was 18, and they had talked for a long time. She did not tell me what our father had written. I did not ask. Our father had written letters to each of us. Those letters were separate, and what they said was what they said, and it was not my business to know what he had said to my brother. What I came to understand over the following months was that, whatever the letter said, it had done something that 20 years of working alongside Marcus had not done. It had made him think about the difference between what he had wanted from the company and what the company had required. Not the same thing. He had wanted the company in the way that people wanted things that represented something beyond the thing itself. The company was the name. It was the status. It was the arrival of being the man who ran what his father had built. He had not wanted it in the way you wanted something, because you understood what it asked of you and were willing to provide it. Our father had understood this. He had not said it in life, because saying it in life would have produced performed change rather than real change, and our father had no patience for performances. He said it in the letter. Whatever he said, Marcus heard it. Not immediately, not completely, but something was working in him in the months after that funeral that had not been working before. The employee provisions were received in January. Gerald handled the disbursements with the same thoroughness he handled everything. Some of the employees did not understand initially where the money had come from. Gerald had prepared a brief explanation that was included with each payment, a paragraph about Walter Ajay's instructions and his intention to acknowledge the people who had made the company what it was. Some of them called our mother. She received those calls in the living room of the house on Accra Road, which was the house our father had built in 1989, and that she had no intention of leaving, and she talked to each caller for as long as they needed. She told me about those conversations. A man named Kofi, who had been with the company since 1997, told her that he had worked for 3 companies in his life, and that Ajay was the only one where he had never once felt that his work was invisible. He said he was not surprised by the payment. He said that was what Walter Ajay did. He kept the promises. She had cried a little when she told me about Kofi. I said, "He saw everything, Mama. He saw all of them." She said, "Yes, he always saw everyone, even the ones who thought he was not looking." She said that last part without specifically saying who she meant. She did not need to. I went to visit Marcus in February. Not to talk about the funeral or the company or the letter. I went because he was my brother, and because avoiding my brother was not something I was willing to do indefinitely. We sat in his living room. Denise brought tea and then gave us the room. We talked for a long time about our father, about specific memories, about the kind of things that surfaces after someone is gone and the active grief has settled into something slower and more complicated. The small things, the particular way he had said certain phrases, the habit of arriving early to everything, the tool shed and how organized it was, and how he had explained the organization to us once when we were children as if the logic of it were obvious to anyone who thought about it. Marcus said, "I used to find the organization of the tool shed excessive." I said, "I know, you said so." He said he heard me say so. I said he heard everything. Marcus looked at his cup. He said, I thought I understood the company. I did not say anything. He said, I understood the surface of it. I understood the clients and the contracts and the revenue. I did not understand what he was keeping together underneath all of that. He said it slowly, like something he had been working out for months and was saying out loud for the first time. I said, what do you think he was keeping together? Marcus said, 60 people who trusted that what the company promised was what the company would do. And the only reason they trusted that was because he had been the person behind the promise for 40 years, and his word was the reason the word was good. He stopped. He said, I was not that person. It was the most honest thing I had ever heard my brother say. I did not argue with it. I said, you can become that person. He looked at me. I said, not for the company, for whatever you do next, you can decide to be the person who keeps the promises. He was quiet for a long time. He said, the letter said something like that. I said, then Papa thought so too. He said, he was not easy on me in the letter. I said, he was not easy on anyone who was not being honest with themselves. You know that. He said, I know. He said I was embarrassed at the church when He stopped. I said, I know. He said, everyone saw. I said, yes. He said, I had told them all those things. I said, yes. He said, and then. I said, and then they all knew. He sat with that. Then he said, was that what he intended, the church? I thought about my father sitting in the back office with the original 1991 carpet that he had never changed because the carpet worked. I said, I think he intended for the truth to be clear. How it was delivered, that was Gerald's call about what the service needed. Marcus said, but Papa knew it would be at the funeral. I said, I think he knew that the clearest moment was the clearest moment, and a church full of people who had believed the wrong thing was the clearest possible correction. Marcus said it was. He said it without self-pity, just acknowledgement. He said, I was wrong about what I deserved. I said, yes. He said, and he knew. I said, for a long time. He said, and he still left me the letter. I said, yes, he did. He looked at his hands. He said, what do I do with that? I said, the same thing you do with anything Papa gave you. You do the work. Marcus did the work. Not immediately, not dramatically, in the quiet, sustained way that real changes happen when they were real. He went back to school in March, not business school, a project management certification program that was practical and specific, and that required him to engage with the technical side of contracting work that he had always left to other people. He told me about it in April on the phone. He said he had been reading about electrical systems for the first time since he had started at the company in his 20s, and that he had not understood in his 20s what he was failing to understand. I said, it is different when you are doing it because you want to know instead of because you are supposed to know. He said, it is completely different. He said, Papa learned from James Morrow because he wanted to understand, not because it was part of the job. He wanted to understand. I said, yes. He said, I was never like that with the company. I said, no, but you can be like that with whatever you do next. He sat with that. He said, I talked to Marcus Jr. about it. Marcus Jr. was building his own thing, something in technology, a small software consultancy that he had started with two friends from university, and that was in its early stages, and that was characterized by exactly the quality Marcus Sr. was describing: genuine interest in the work for its own sake. Marcus Sr. had started showing up to help Marcus Jr. in ways that were useful, rather than in ways that were about being the experienced older person in the room. He had been organizing things, managing supplier relationships, doing the operations work that young technical founders were often poor at because their interest was in the product rather than in the business of the product. He was good at it, genuinely good. In a way, he had never been good at the things he had been doing at Ajay Electrical Contractors, because at Ajay, he had been performing authority rather than providing capability. Here there was no authority to perform. There was only the work. And Marcus, doing work without the performance layer on top of it, turned out to be someone his father would have recognized. My mother and I talked about all of this one evening on her porch. It was August, the kind of August evening that reminded you of why the months around it were worth surviving. The air was cooler than it had been. There were sounds from the street that were ordinary and good. She said, "Your brother is different." I said, "He is." She said, "Your father knew this could happen." I said, "He knew something." She said, "He told me once that Marcus reminded him of himself before James Morrow. He said Marcus had been given the arrived version of things before he had done the work that teaches you what arriving costs." I had not heard this before. I said, "He said that to you." She said, "He said it to me in 2018. I did not understand it then. I understand it now." She said, "James Morrow made your father do things the hard way. The job that was supposed to take 3 weeks took 6 because your father would not move past a section until he was certain it was right. And James Morrow let him be certain instead of rushing him." She said, "Nobody did that for Marcus. We gave him the company and expected the company to teach him. But the company cannot teach you what the hard work teaches you. You have to do the hard work first." I said, "Papa understood this." She said, "He understood it very late. By the time he understood it clearly, there was not enough time for the work, so he made the other decision." She said, "He sold the company to protect what the company was. He wrote the letter to give Marcus what the company could not give him anymore." She paused. She said, "He made the right choices, both of them." I said, "Yes." She said, "It cost him something to sell." I said, "I know." She said, "He built that with his hands, from a van." I said, "I know, Mama." She said, "And he sold it because he built it with his hands, and he understood what it required, and he could not leave it somewhere that would not give it what it required." She said, "That is the kind of man he was. He understood what things required, including the people he loved." The evening settled around us. The street sounds continued. The porch was the same porch it had always been. She said, "He would be satisfied with how Marcus is now." I said, "I think so too." She said, "Not because of the outcome, because of the honesty. He always valued the honesty more than the outcome." I said, "Yes." She said, "You're Marcus Jr. He has the quality your father had." I said, "Yes, he does." She said, "Your father would have liked that." I said, "He would have asked him 100 questions about the software." She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from a true thing said at the right moment. We sat on the porch for another hour. What I keep returning to is the tool shed. My father organized it according to a logic that seemed obvious to him, and that he explained to us once as children with the patience of someone who assumed the logic would be obvious to us too if he said it clearly enough. He was wrong about that. We did not understand it then. I understand it now. Every tool was in the place that made it most useful when it was needed, not in the place that looked most organized, not in the place that impressed someone standing in the doorway, in the place that was most useful when the work was happening. He organized the tool shed the same way he organized the company, the same way he organized the estate, the same way he thought about the people in his life, not by what they appeared to be, but by what they were most capable of becoming and what conditions they needed to become it. He sold the company because that was where it needed to be, not because he had given up on Marcus, because Marcus had not yet done the work that would make him what the company needed. He wrote the letter because some conclusions could only be reached through the telling, when the action had made the telling possible. He arranged it so the truth came out at the fullest moment, in the church, in front of everyone, not from cruelty, because he understood that the clearest corrections were the ones that could not be privately managed into something more comfortable. Marcus fell to his knees in Calvary Baptist Church on a Thursday morning in October. He got back up. He did the work. Our Father knew he would. That is what it means to really see someone, not just what they are doing, but what they could become if the conditions were right. Walter Ajay built bridges. He built them to last. He built them with the math done right, and the materials right, and the construction what it needed to be. He was still building, right up until the end. Like this video right now, one tap. Subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. Every week a story that goes somewhere real. Share this with someone who is building something and who understands what it costs to build it correctly. Let them see what that kind of building looks like across a whole life. Comment below. Tell me, what do you think our Father wrote in Marcus's letter? I want every theory.